slides, right?
Not yet. Not yet. We cannot see any of your files yet. Okay, so then let me just quickly start this our meeting tonight. Again, I have to apologize for all these technical issues, but this is what's going on these days. We all know why. Okay, so there you go. See, all right. Had much less time. This is where I was. Had much less time to accumulate citations than his earlier works. These 5 papers average about 600 citation each, whereas the average scientific paper accumulates 13 citations over a circa 30-year period. Pall has published all of his 25 post-retirement papers without any salary or other payment to produce those publications. 16 of those 25 papers each discuss how electromagnetic fields, EMFs, impact the cells of our bodies and those of other organisms, the main focus of this talk tonight. If you listen carefully to this talk, you will learn that electronically generated EMFs are coherent, producing strong electric forces and magnetic forces, which produce, in turn, biological effects. Most natural EMFs are incoherent, producing only minuscule electric and magnetic forces. Safety guidelines are based on there being only thermal heating effects. These may protect us from most natural EMFs, but utterly fail to protect us from EMFs used in wireless communications. EMFs discussed subsequently are electronically generated EMFs. Most biological effects are produced by forces activating voltage-gated calcium channels and increases in calcium inside of cells. Every single cell in the body is impacted by EMFs. Depending on time available, Dr. Pall will talk about EMF effects ranging from diverse impacts on the human brain to the reproductive systems, life-threatening cardiac effects, hormonal effects, cancer, immune system effects, and effects on the red blood cells. Welcome, Dr. Martin Pall.
Thank you for the introduction. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I'm not going to be able to share my slides, so I'm just going to talk from your introduction. And so with regard to the issue of the coherent electronically generated EMFs, this was first discovered back in 1831 when Michael Faraday, the great British physicist, who was a physicist before we even had the word physics in the English language, showed that electric currents generate an electromagnetic field in the space around them. And he suggested that those electromagnetic fields may be coherent, but did not prove that they were. Proof of that came later when a French physicist whose name was Pierre Guittard showed in 1850 that in fact those electronically generated EMFs were coherent, and for that reason, because they're coherent, they act as a single object basically, and so they produce strong forces because of that. Now, in contrast to that, most natural EMFs, and this was only discovered later, are made up of gigantic numbers of individual photons going off in different vector directions with different polarities and phases and often frequencies. And because of that, they are incoherent. They only produce minuscule forces. And so the idea that these natural EMFs can only work by heating things or producing thermal effects makes sense. What doesn't make sense is the fact that because electronically generated EMFs that are coherent are used for all wireless communication, to use safety guidelines that are based strictly on thermal effects makes absolutely no sense. Now, how do we know that that these coherent electronically generated EMFs are used in wireless communication? We know it, first of all, because every time you have an emitting antenna, it has to produce these coherent EMFs. And then the way it works on a receiving antenna is that the coherent fields put forces on mobile electrons in the receiving antenna and move them, and that then generates an electric current in the receiving antenna. That's the way all wireless communication works. And so you have to have a coherent EMF being put out and then its forces being affected there. So that's actually one of several kinds of evidence that show that all these EMFs used for wireless communication are coherent. I won't even tell you what the other two are, but there are other types of evidence that show that as well. So what we have then is safety guidelines that were originally proposed by ICNIRP, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, which is an organization that was set up by the industry to suggest safety guidelines. And they are entirely based on average intensities averaged over either a 6-minute period or 30-minute period. And they're entirely based on only having thermal effects, that is heating so they argue that everything has to be through heating of biological tissues. But that, in fact, is not the way these coherent EMFs work in the body. The way these EMFs work in the body is they work on a structure called the voltage sensor, which controls the opening of ionic channels in the plasma membrane of our cells. So in their cells, as I think you know, all of our cells are surrounded by a membrane called the plasma membrane. And in that membrane are a number of channels that can be activated through a structure called the voltage sensor. The voltage sensor is the predominant structure by which electric fields produce biological effects. So, so to have the voltage sensor being the primary target isn't surprising at all. But of course, the industry completely ignores all these findings. So there are quite a number of channels which are activated by the voltage sensor. There are at least a dozen different ones in animal cells, and there are 3 in plant cells. They all are controlled by the voltage sensor. But the ones that actually produce most of the biological effects are the calcium channels, the voltage-gated calcium channels. And this is what I showed in the very first paper that I published on EMFs that was published in 2013. And that paper showed, and again, the studies that I talk about are not my own studies, okay? These are studies that have been published in the literature by various research groups. And so what that study showed was that if you use specific channel blockers that block the voltage-gated calcium channels, they will prevent or greatly lower all the biological effects that are produced by EMFs. Okay, so so what does that show you? It shows you that the EMFs, and these are all electronically generated EMFs that we're talking about, that the EMFs work predominantly by activating these voltage-gated calcium channels, and a consequence of that, they produce excessive calcium in the cell, excessive intracellular calcium. Now, why is that? The reason is that the extracellular calcium levels under most conditions are about 10,000 times higher than the intracellular calcium levels. So when you open these channels, you get huge amounts of calcium flowing into the cell, and that then produces large increases in the calcium in the cell. And because calcium signaling is very, very important in all animal cells, in fact, in all plant cells as well, it's the calcium channels that produce the effects. That's true in animal cells, it's true in plant cells, and published on both of them. So so that's the way the system works. It does not work first based on heating or thermal effects at all. And so we have a situation here where the safety guidelines only protect us from thermal effects, and consequently, almost every single man, woman, and child on Earth, plus many other organisms, are impacted by EMFs because the safety guidelines are completely bogus. Okay, so um, that is the world we live in for at least for a little while. I don't think we're going to live in it very long if this continues. Okay, so let me say something about how. So basically, everything, or almost everything, that the EMFs do goes through increases in intracellular calcium and increases in calcium signaling. Uh, Now, I've published on what I consider four different pathways of action by which calcium signaling can produce biological effects. And one of them is sort of a general one that's, there are many different um, proteins that are regulated by calcium. Probably the most important of them are what are called protein kinases, which modify a lot of proteins and produce biological changes uh, as a consequence of the increases in intracellular calcium. And so there are three specific pathways that I talk about. One of them is a pathway that involves increases in what's called superoxide and nitric oxide. And these are both produced through calcium-dependent mechanisms. And those two compounds react with each other extremely rapidly to form a compound called peroxynitrite, which is a potent oxidant. And peroxynitrite breaks down to form highly reactive free radicals. It produces oxidative stress. It activates something called NF-kappa B, which produces a big inflammatory effect. So, as you may know, and these in turn act to produce mitochondrial dysfunction. So the mitochondria, which are the energy-producing parts of the cells, are impacted as well. And so all of this stuff goes through excessive intracellular calcium. And so many of the effects can be directly ascribed to intracellular calcium that we see. Okay, now, okay, so there's that one pathway. There's another pathway called the therapeutic pathway, which is almost diametrically opposite the peroxynitrite oxidative stress free radical inflammation pathway. They have two pathways that produce almost exactly opposite effects. And one of them is triggered by relatively small increases in intracellular calcium. That's the therapeutic pathway. And another one is produced by higher levels of intracellular calcium. That's the peroxynitrite pathway. And these, and each of those pathways, interestingly, inhibits the other. So when when you have one being predominated, it turns off the other one. You have the other one being predominated, it turns off the first one. So and so what that means is it's not at all uncommon for EMFs, which are different EMFs, to produce essentially opposite effects in the body. Okay, and and so this makes the literature very confusing if you don't know that, and the industry for many years, I don't know whether they're still claiming this now. They've said, "Oh, we don't pay any attention to anything that's not consistent." Well, there's nothing inconsistent about these results if the conditions are different, right? The only way you can have inconsistency is if you're using the same conditions and getting different results. So, that's that's simply an excuse for ignoring a lot of literature. Excuse me. And then there are other ways in which calcium signaling can act. So anyway, okay, so that's basically the pattern, and so what happens as a consequence of that? Let's start talking about some of the things that go on. Now, in studies that go back, these were animal studies that go back to the 1950s and 1960s. And these were reviewed in 1973 by a couple of Soviet scientists, Tolskaya and Gordon, and they wrote a book that was also translated into English, which I have a Xerox copy of, and what they showed, they have a lot of interesting things in that book if you can get a hold of it. One of the things they showed was that the most sensitive types of cells in the body are the neuronal cells, and including the brain cells in animals. So when you take EMF radiation and you irradiate animals, all the different tissues are impacted, but some of them are impacted much more than others. The three tissues that are most sensitive in terms of the cellular structure of these cells are the nervous system, the heart, and the testis. And not surprisingly, you get a lot of effects that it can be related in humans. It can be related to the human brain. You get also cardiac effects, and you get reproductive effects. And the reproductive effects do not only occur in males, they occur in females as well. But male fertility is much easier to study. So most of the studies have been done on male fertility, but there are so you get massive effects on fertility that lower human fertility. And let me just say, we know all over the world that that we're getting essentially every technologically advanced country on Earth now has reproduction levels that are well below replacement levels, except one. And many of the third world countries are dropping in reproduction dramatically. The only ones that have still relatively high reproductive rates are in sub-Saharan Africa. So, so reproduction has changed a lot, and I believe a lot of that is due to the EMF effects. So anyway, that's and we have rampant problems with infertility, lowered fertility in Western countries, and it's been shown, for instance, that men who use their laptops with the Wi-Fi on, that the sperm motility goes way down. The structure of the sperm is become more and more abnormal. That doesn't mean that the people are completely infertile, but it certainly impacts fertility. And there are also effects on the DNA in the sperm cells. And in animal studies, you can show also that the structure of the testis becomes abnormal, and that the sperm count goes way down. Oh, and the other thing that happens when you irradiate human sperm is you get increases in apoptosis. You get increases in what's called programmed cell death. So a lot of the sperm die, and so the effects on human sperm, on human semen, experimentally, it's been shown that the EMFs produce, increases in apoptosis. They produce abnormal structure. They produce lowered motility, and they produce effects on the DNA where the DNA is damaged. So all of those have been shown experimentally. And the industry claims there's never been anything that shows that humans are impacted, and it's absolute nonsense, complete nonsense. The other, I think, most compelling example where we have good experimental studies, extensive experimental studies on humans, it has to do with the changes in the electrical activity in the human brain. So electrical activity in the human brain is measured by EEGs, and it's been shown in 38 different studies that different EMFs impact the electrical activity in the human brain. So there's no question that the human brain experimentally is impacted. Now, we generally, so how is it impacted? Well, we get, and these are not experimental studies. These are mostly epidemiological studies, but we get widespread neurological and neuropsychiatric effects, and I published on those in 2015. So what happens? You get effects on sleep. People claim they're tired all the time. They are depressed. They're anxious. Their memory doesn't work. So all these things are, as I think almost everyone knows, very common in our societies. People are complaining about them all the time, and we have very good evidence they're caused by EMFs, and then the powers that be just ignore all this stuff. So, okay, so that's just one thing that relates to the human brain. Let's talk about some other things. I published a paper on Alzheimer's, and there is a well-established theory of Alzheimer's causation that's called the calcium hypothesis of Alzheimer's disease. And so what's been shown is that, and this has been shown to some extent in animal models, because there are good animal models of Alzheimer's. So you can study things experimentally in those animal models. And there's also evidence in humans. So you have, so it's been argued that it's excessive intracellular calcium is the key causal factor in Alzheimer's disease. And that's probably also true in other neurodegenerative diseases as well. So this may not be linked just to Alzheimer's, and that you get and it's been shown that excessive intracellular calcium triggers essentially the whole gamut of changes that occur in Alzheimer's disease. So what do those include? They include cell death, and including via apoptosis, but also via two other mechanisms. And those all can be produced by excessive intracellular calcium from other studies. And so they impact the synapses in the brain, so they're not working normally. And that's a key factor in terms of the decline in learning and memory in Alzheimer's patients. And you also get increases in the beta amyloid protein. And in the beta amyloid protein, by the way, not in terms of plaques, but in terms of smaller protein aggregates. What does it do? It increases intracellular calcium. And it does it in three different ways. So you can see that the beta amyloid protein has a feedback loop that exacerbates the whole thing. So you can get excessive intracellular calcium from EMFs. You can get it from various chemicals, and you can probably get it from other things as well. And they then triggers these mechanisms involved in Alzheimer's, and one of which is higher production of this beta amyloid protein, which in turn feedbacks into the calcium. So that's basically. I mean, I've got other things in the paper, but so that was published in a mainline Alzheimer's paper. It's now been cited 30 times. That's not too bad that's pretty good for something that's only been out for about 4 years. And so people are paying attention to it. And okay, so let's talk about other brain-related effects. There were studies published by Dr. Henry Lai, who was a professor at the University of Washington in Seattle, about 30 years ago, which strongly suggests that EMFs are physiologically addictive. And so what he showed, and this was again about 30 years ago, was that a lot of the neurological effects produced over kind of medium time frames, not very rapid, but not that long either, over a period of, and he studied these in rats experimentally. And what he showed is that many of the neurological effects go through the activation of the opioid receptors in the brain. And how did he show that? You could use a blocker that blocks the opioid receptor, and most of those physiological effects never develop. Okay? So what does that show you? I mean, the opioid receptor in the brain has a very important role in drug addiction, not only from opioid drug addiction, but also from other drugs which act in part through the endogenous opioids that are produced in the brain. So, so that's important. Another neurotransmitter that's very important in addiction is dopamine, and dopamine release has been shown to be increased. This was not done by Henry Lai; it was done by other people. Dopamine release has been shown to work to be stimulated by EMFs. And okay, now The EMFs, as I told you before, go through the activation of the voltage-gated calcium channels, the VGCCs. And it's been shown, and these are recent studies now, in the drug addiction literature, is that there are two of the VGCCs that have essential roles in producing addiction for various drugs. One of them is the CAV 1.2 and 1.3, and I haven't introduced you to that terminology. You don't really need to worry about that, but it's basically, for whatever reason, the two of them actually have different functions in the addiction process. One of them acts earlier and the other one acts later. So one of them produces changes in the neural circuitry in the brain, and then the second one then produces the actual addiction response once that first thing happens. So you get one thing happening and then you get a second one. And so both of these VGCCs, of course, we know are activated by the EMFs. So it shouldn't be surprising that EMFs may produce addictive responses. Now, let me just say, there were two other things that Henry Lai showed around 30 years ago. And these are absolutely amazing studies. One is that that you can learn this addiction process, this addictive physiology, if you will, by classical conditioning. So the EMFs then produce a response in the brain, which when that response goes along with something else, you remember the Pavlov's dog's control, classical conditioning, ringing a bell. They didn't use a bell in these studies, but the point is you can pair them, and you can become then you can get an addictive response to a second stressor that's paired up with the EMFs. And what that does is it raises the issue about whether such things, which are well recognized in the literature as cell phone addiction and internet addiction, may be caused to a great extent by the fact that the cell phones and the Wi-Fi that's usually used for internet connection both have EMFs. So the EMFs may be causing, at least to some extent, both cell phone addiction and internet addiction, which is very widespread in our societies. So there was a second thing which Henry Lai showed, again, about 30 years ago, and that was that EMFs exacerbate the action of addictive drugs. And so there's nothing surprising about that based on what I've already told you, but that may have very important implications because it means that EMFs may in fact be an important cause of the opioid crisis that we have. So, when you learn these things and you see all these connections, it just opens up, incredible numbers of at least potential and I believe actual implications. Okay, let's talk about okay. Oh, I wanted to say one other thing before I leave the issue of brain-related effects. I published a paper last year on autism and autism spectrum disorders, and the pattern there, I believe, is at least superficially very similar to the pattern I talked to you about with Alzheimer's. There is very good evidence, genetic evidence, that so we know the EMFs act primarily via VGCC activation. You can cause Alzheimer's in humans by mutations that activate the VGCCs. Okay, so the very thing that the EMFs do, that thing can be caused. The increase in the VGCC activity can cause autism, and we know that from genetic studies. And we're talking about in humans now. Okay, people, babies who have mutations which have very high VGCC activity do develop autism at a very young, very strong autism at a very young age. And okay, so that's one of many types of evidence on this. You might want to look at this paper. I think it's, well, obviously I'm prejudiced, but I think it's a great paper. It's actually, it may well be the most complex paper I've ever written. And I don't, so, it may be difficult to understand, but basically, there is, we know that, so how then do EMFs, and let me say, there are also chemicals that are implicated in causing autism. And now I looked at 15 different classes of chemicals that are implicated in causing autism. Every single one of those produces excessive intracellular calcium. So the intracellular calcium is key, I believe, both for the EMFs and also for these chemicals. And they may be involved in another causation as well. I'm trying to give you this stuff without sort of blowing you out of the water, which I don't want to do. So anyway, so what I argued in this, so what is the central cause of autism? And let me just say, there's no consensus at all. In fact, when I looked at this, usually in science, what you have is you have an old paradigm and you want to argue against the old paradigm and for a new paradigm, right? Here, there's no old paradigm. There is no general idea about what is the central cause of autism. So what I had to do to write this paper is to come up with what I think was the central cause of autism. I think the central cause of autism is the following, that during the perinatal period, so the period in the months before birth and then after birth, so there is a huge amount of synaptogenesis going on in the developing brain. So the synapses, which are the ways in which the neurons connect with each other, are going on, and there's something on the order of 10 to the 15th synapses in the human brain, in an adult human brain. So there's gigantic numbers of synapses, and obviously, if you do something that impedes the normal production of the synapses, brain function is going to be heavily, at least potentially heavily impacted. We have a lot of reasons to think that is what's going on in autism, and that the normal synaptogenesis during the perinatal period is impacted, and that includes the fact that the different connectivity of different parts of the brain are aberrant in autism. It includes and what's also interesting is that autism patients have a higher frequency of where the brain size is actually abnormally large, and that has been shown to be caused by aberrant synaptogenesis. Okay, so and what I argued is there's 6 different mechanisms. You can see what they are in my paper if you want to look them up, that have roles in synaptogenesis and controlling the formation of the synapses in the developing brain. And all 6 of those are regulated by intracellular calcium. So if you have excessive intracellular calcium, it becomes aberrant. And that's what's happening, I believe, in autism. That's the central cause of autism. And I believe that's true for not only EMF caused autism, but also genetically caused autism and chemically caused autism. There's another stressor that may have a role as well. And this I did not publish on. Maybe I should have, but you can't do everything. And that may be ultrasound. And this has been argued by others that ultrasound may have an important role in autism causation. And ultrasound works on another channel. It's called piezo-1. So the way ultrasound works is it activates a stretch receptor in the plasma membrane of our cells. That's called piezo-1. And when that stretch receptor is activated, it opens up an ion channel that allows calcium to flow into the cell. And it's not completely specific for calcium, but the effects that are produced go through the calcium. Okay, so that may be another effect. Okay, let's talk about. Am I going too too long here, Bettina?
No, you're still good. Maybe there is one or the other question already. Quite frankly, I do have a question.
Okay.
So you were saying that autism and brain issues and all that kind of stuff is obviously EMF related.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we know that there has been rolled out some sort of an interesting vaccination a few years back.
Mm-hmm.
How does that play together? Is there any connection you can see between the EMF radiation and the jab?
I think you can see a connection not between EMF radiation, but between the chemicals and autism. So of the chemicals, okay, so the 15 classes of chemicals, at least 4 of them occur or have occurred fairly commonly in vaccines. Okay, and those include aluminum hydroxide, which is used as an adjuvant in many different vaccines. And I discussed in my paper how aluminum hydroxide works to produce excessive calcium. And the interesting thing is that, you know, I read a bunch of reviews on it, and nobody seemed to know how it it was. Aluminum hydroxide does produce excessive intracellular calcium. That's been shown. But how it does it, there was no no good evidence on that. And I read this one very long review on aluminum hydroxide, found nothing that told you how it worked. So I went in literature and I found out how it worked, and you can see in the paper if you want how it works. But the point is that it does work, and it does produce increases in intracellular calcium. There are several others. There's an antibiotic called neomycin, which is often used in multi-dose vials of vaccines. And neomycin activates the NMDA receptors, which in turn causes excessive intracellular calcium. In fact, 12 of the 15 chemicals actually work through increases in NMDA activity to produce the excessive calcium. Aluminum hydroxide was an exception to that. It doesn't work. It does not work that way. So we know a lot about how these things can work, and that's that's. But there are other things that can occur. One of them, of course, is the mercurial that was used, and I don't know. It was used as a preservative, also in multi-dose vials. Um, I've seen claims that it's still being used, and I've seen claims that no, it's not being used. So I don't know whether it's currently being used, but it was used for many years in a lot of different vaccines. Thimerosal is the name of the mercurial, and so that's another one, and that also produces increases in intracellular calcium, and uh, and then there's I don't know there's at least one other, but anyway, but so yeah, you can make an argument that the common components of vaccines have a role working in that way. I didn't make that argument in my paper, in part because I knew if I did, it wouldn't have gotten accepted. I never would have gotten it published. So I'm not going to make that argument, but there is some evidence for that. So yeah.
I can
Okay.
see that. Yeah. So we do have a question here from Pam. How do
Mhm.
we protect ourselves against higher levels of EMR, especially when using laptops or cell phones? What can we do to safeguard ourselves?
Well, let me say, first of all, the best thing to do is to use wired connections. You don't have to use Wi-Fi for anything. And we shouldn't be using Wi-Fi for anything. It's unnecessary. You can use a wired connection, which is safer. It's much more secure. You can't hack into the system as easily. And so I have to say, um, it's sometimes difficult when you're getting your internet connection hooked up to get them to turn off the Wi-Fi. And I've had that problem both in the U.S. and in Canada. And the other thing which happens, which is even more pernicious maybe, is that there are a number of these companies that use your modem to service people who are driving around. So they're using radiation from your not the Wi-Fi for your computer, but other radiation to serve these people that are driving around. And and so they're irradiating you with that. And it's very difficult sometimes to get them to turn it off. I think oftentimes, and this is what I've done here, I have to say, is just put a lot of shielding around the modem so that you just don't, so that you're relatively protected. That's kind of a pain to do, but it's in this world, that's what we have to do often, I find. Let me just say one other thing about that. I found that aluminized bubble wrap, which is used uh, as a for thermal insulation, like wrapping ducks and things, is actually quite a good shielding material, and it's relatively cheap compared with the stuff that you buy from the companies that sell shielding material, which tends to be pretty expensive. So you may want to use that in a lot of situations. And for example, I've got in my living room here, I was getting pretty high radiation, Wi-Fi radiation from my neighbor, and so I just put this stuff up on the wall in that particular location, and it cut it way down. So that was good. Okay. I don't know. Other questions?
Yeah, Hillary's got a question here. What can we do to try to get the safety standards changed? Canadians for Safe Tech have been trying to make changes for 10 plus years. They seem to continue to be ignored. The HESA committee was made suggestions for changes years ago, and they continue to be ignored.
I think the only thing to do, I think it's still the case that assault is against the law in Canada and the US and various other countries. And so when you can prove assault on your body, including your brain, from EMFs, and you can prove that the safety guidelines are completely and utterly bogus and therefore do not protect anyone from anything, any relevant thing, you ought to be able to sue them for a few $100 billion over time, and then maybe they'll start paying attention. That's the only thing I can think of. I have to say, it's my opinion that the hardest things to improve in terms of safety are cell phones. And, cordless phones we don't need anyway. And even if we did, they'd be very easy to make much safer than they are. But cell phones are the trickiest of all the things. And the other problem that relates to cell phones is that, we're using faster and faster ones that pulse much more. The pulsations are the most dangerous thing. And I haven't told you why that is, but it is the case, and I can tell you why if you want me to spend the time on it. But the point is, so when you have things like 5G, which pulses vastly more than 4G, which pulses vastly more than 3G, etc., and where you have smart devices, where the smarter they are, the more they pulse, because it's the pulsations that carry the information. This is really a situation that is frankly bizarre beyond belief. And we're on a treadmill towards smarter and smarter things, and and they really are dumber. They're not smarter. They are more damaging to our bodies, and we have to stop doing this, or we're not going to be here very long.
Right.
And let me say one other thing about this. As far as I can determine, the only thing that makes any sense for 5G is to use it for AI communication. And if you're using it for AI communication to produce artificial intelligence, then what you're doing is you're universally destroying human intelligence in the process. So, I really think that this whole thing is it's insanity. I don't know. Maybe I didn't answer the question, but that's yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so there's another question from Derek. Derek's question is, can you comment on a relative risk from 5G towers, including distance versus Wi-Fi versus cell phone usage?
Well, I think the papers that Leonard Hardell has published in Sweden on individuals who've been exposed to 5G radiation show that there are people who are getting massively impacted by 5G in very short time periods, and that those include neurological, neuropsychiatric effects. They include cardiac effects, which I guess I haven't talked about here. Is that right? And they include electromagnetic hypersensitivity, and which he used the old term for, which is microwave syndrome, but that's the same as EHS. So they're being heavily impacted, and so the others, I think they're all dangerous. I mean, it's not, none of these are safe. And we have to avoid all of them. I mean, it's really horrendous. I have to say, um, when I just moved to Kelowna in June, as some of you may know, um, from the U.S. And when I was traveling back and forth to look at housing here, um, on one of the trips, I got on the plane and I had my meter with me, and I sat down in the seat, and there was absolutely horrendous radiation in the plane. Um, I believe it was from all the cell phones that people were using in the plane. And the reason I believe that was when when we got ready to take off and they told everybody to turn off their cell phones, and at least most people did apparently, the radiation went way down. It was, but the radiation was so high that it went up to 2.5 million, which is the highest my meter can measure, which is, you know, about a million-fold higher than you really want it. But that's it was extraordinary, truly extraordinary, and I think that was from cell phones. So flying is dangerous. You should bring bring some shielding, and I find that wearing a balaclava can help. Although you can get impacts on the eye, and that's so that can be an issue as well. You can get retinal detachment in the human eye from EMFs, and so that's very dangerous, of course. So anyway, but yeah, I don't know. But,
Just on a side note, I'm hardwired in, so I was not on Wi-Fi when I had these internet issues. So I should be safer, but I'm obviously not. Anyway, but that's a different story, a different question probably these days. Anyway, Lauren's got a question.
okay.
Dr. Pall, have you ever been asked to present as an expert witness per your findings in any court of law? If not, why do you think this is so?
I have okay. Okay, I have been an expert witness in 3 different trials, but only one of those involved EMS, and that was a lawsuit that was in. No, I may be giving you the wrong information here. Yeah, it was a trial that had to do with EMFs, and and so I did do. I was an expert in that trial, but that's the only one that I've been an expert in. Um, I guess it's a little puzzling to me that I haven't been called more. The reason I find it puzzling is that, um, you know, in general, the work that I've done has been very highly respected and very highly cited, and there, 3 of my 5 most highly cited papers were all on EMFs, including the first one that I published. And but there are other papers I've published that are developing very substantial numbers of citations in the EMF field. So, and that's not an easy thing to do. And so, I don't really understand why that is, but that's the situation.
Right. Pam, you raised your hand. Go right ahead. You've got to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. Just click on the microphone.
Yeah, you're muted, Pam.
Yeah.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having this event. Amazing. Thank you, Doctor. I'm always, I don't, I always have a lot of questions, but I want to say something that I'm not a geek, but I learned something and I want to share it. Is very important. The 5G towers and versus other towers. Okay. Since 2021, if you phone your provider, they can separate your 2.4 gigahertz and 5G. You just need separate passwords. Well, they usually bundle it, and meaning you will be automatically connected to 5G. Well, it's faster, they say. But guess what? Do you want 2.4 or 5G? I've used this 2.4 since 2021. I have the option of 5G. I don't use it. There is no speed, nothing, no relative. Everything you download, 75 speed is required. So the reason when they ask you, you have to be smart. I have a Samsung printer. It's M2070. I'll put it in the chat. All you have to say is my printer can actually only print using 2.4. It will not print on 5G. Nowadays, printers are, you can buy, they're only 5G. So this one is 2.4. You can use this example and try it. So you separate your 2.4 and 5G and have separate passwords, because also what they do, they're so smart. They will automatically connect you to 5G, even if you have 2.4. So you randomly have to go and check whether you're connected to 2.4 or 5G, because that's what they're doing. They're eliminating this. They want more people getting sick, more people with EMR and so forth. So I just wanted to share this. You can do it.
Okay. Yeah, I would just add something to that, and that is, I mean, I use everything wired that I possibly can.
Yeah,
So
which is good.
My printer is wired, my mouse is wired, my keyboard is
Yes.
wired, everything is wired. So,
Okay, in my case, I sold my house and I'm renting, and we are provided Wi-Fi, we are sharing, and there's no way I have hardwired. When I had a chance, I got it hardwired, and when I rented for a few years back, I have no choice but share Wi-Fi. I've put the aluminum thing in front of my modem because my modem is in the living room,
yeah.
but we have no choice. So whoever has the choice, go back to hardwired and get your 2.4. I use laptop, cell phone 2.4. I've used it for 4 years. I've had no issues.
Good for you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, so anybody else? I know I see Troy is in our Zoom call here, and Troy is a very, very good friend of mine in Nova Scotia. So he is 4 hours ahead of us. So I'm pretty sure, Troy, you have a question. Come on.
I did have a question, but somebody already asked it. So I'll expand upon that question. So a lot of I can't find it right now, but there's like little rocks that you can get, little black rocks. I forget what they're called, and they're supposed to help with the Wi-Fi and the EMF and stuff like that. There it is. Shungjit.
Shanghai.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then there's those pyramid things. There are epoxy pyramids, and there's copper in them and stuff like that. And so I have noticed when I'm using my little detector to check the radiation coming off my Wi-Fi and stuff like that, that when I do put the little pyramid in front of it, um, that it does lessen the amount of Wi-Fi. Because I have kids, and they like to be on Wi-Fi and stuff, and so they'd be pretty upset if I made them sit on the couch being wired to the internet, like I was when I was a kid. But I do want to try to protect them, and so I'm wondering if any of these things are any good, or am I just wasting my money when I get stuff like that?
I think I think a number of them are probably good. I haven't tested it myself, so I'm not going to say, endorse any particular ones. But let me tell you how I think they can act. Okay. So when you when you have EMFs activating the voltage gated calcium channels, the VGCCs. They work on the voltage sensor, and and that's how you get the activation of these channels. I think that EMFs can not only activate the voltage sensor, but other EMFs can interfere with the effects that are produced. So you can have one EMF that's producing an effect, and you can have a second one that may interfere with the effects produced by the first one. And there are actually quite a number of studies that have been published by something like 10 different research groups on this, where they use different EMFs to try to influence things. And they show they do inhibit the biological responses. And so I think these things can work, and they can work in they basically come in two different types. One is that you can actually generate a second EMF electronically that would, that might interfere. The second is that you can use things that might reflect an initial EMF, so it's bouncing off of something. I think that may be the way shungite works, is that it can bounce off of things, and you get a second EMF coming from a different location that can interfere with the first one. So these things are quite complex, and they're not, but there are, and there are things such as I believe. So I published a paper on static magnetic fields, and static magnetic fields do work by VGCC activation, but they produce specifically therapeutic effects, not the pathophysiological effects. And so they may be a really good way of trying to interfere with the effects, the EMFs that are producing these pathophysiological effects. So so I do believe they can work. I'm not saying that I'm endorsing any particular type, but I do think they can work. I think they're plausible mechanisms by which they can work.
I appreciate that. I appreciate all your knowledge that you're sharing with us tonight, and thank you, Bettina, for organizing this.
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah, so our guest from the United States, go right ahead.
Very good. We have encouraged people to have Dr. Pall on many times. And then when you, Bettina, were banging your head against the wall, how come nobody's listening? That is why I tried to put you two in touch with each other, since you live in the same town. I would like to take advantage of Dr. Pall being here, because in past interviews, he has tied in the plant life, the forestry, and wildfires to this bombardment from satellites. And I'm wondering if he could touch on that a little bit. I remember him attending a symposium of some sort and was talking with some guy about EMFs and plants, and the guy happened to be a dope grower, and he said, no, we've already determined that the electricity that we use to grow cannabis is beneficial to plant life. And the terpenes Dr. Pall has dabbled in, and these are an extreme fire hazards, especially around houses. So I'd like to have Dr. Pall fill in some blanks on my comment.
Okay, so you want me to talk about how EMFs may have roles on through their impact on plants and the fire? Yeah.
Yeah.
I and let me apologize first of all for the complexity of some of my comments, because you know I work on these things often for years and try to put things together, and it may take me years to figure things out. And so the fire paper that I published took me 4 years to write. The autism paper that I published took me 6 years to write. And a lot of these things take quite a while to, you know, to make, put enough things together that you can make a compelling case. What I think is happening here, and it is the following. And so let me say first of all that there are substantial studies that have been done about EMF impacts on plants. And I published a paper earlier showing that that the impacts go through the activation of calcium channels. So you get excessive intracellular calcium. The channels are different than the animal ones, but they basically work very similarly. The three channels that I think are involved all have roles in electrical communication in plants. So we have reason to think that the voltage sensor, which occurs in them, in fact, is functional, and you know is impacted then by the electrical fields of the EMFs. So so what happens when you expose plants to EMFs is you get much higher levels of both terpenes and 3 other classes of plant volatiles, so a total of 4 classes of plant volatiles. You also get increases in peroxynitrite and the free radicals associated with it. So the first thing that happens, so the terpenes, of course, are highly flammable. You know, they are, but that's just the first step in that process of making the plants, you know, much more active in producing the severity of these fires. The second thing is that both the terpenes and the other 3 classes of plant volatiles act to depolarize the plasma membrane of the plants. And what does that do? That activates the same channels that are activated by the EMFs. Okay, it also acts on the voltage sensor that controls those same channels. Okay, so what does that mean? If you have extensive periods of very low wind, you can accumulate large amounts of these 4 classes of volatiles. And what do? If they accumulate in the air, they make the air much heavier. Why? Because these vapors are much heavier than the other air molecules. So what will happen, and this will only happen if you have extensive periods of very low wind, is these volatiles will move over the surface of the ground. They will selectively impact the low-growing plants and the low-growing parts of plants. And when they do that, they make those plants produce high levels of terpenes, high levels of peroxynitrite, high levels of the other volatiles. And so you'll get selective EMF-like effects affecting those low-growing plants. What happens thirdly is peroxynitrite and its associated free radicals react with the terpene, and it produces 3 different classes of explosives, known explosives. These are hydroperoxides, they're nitrate esters, and they're nitro compounds. And each of those are known classes of explosives. So that means the terpene chemistry, which is very active, I mean, these are very chemically active compounds, they'll form different classes of explosives, real explosives, selectively in these low-growing plants. because of this process of the volatiles acting on those low-growing plants. Okay, I think that is the central cause of the explosive nature of many of these fires. And what you find is that areas around buildings, which of course buildings have all kinds of EMFs coming out from them, the low-growing plants burn at extraordinary speed, at extraordinarily high temperatures. So you end up with a light gray powder. Everything is burned. You don't see charred material. You don't see unburned material. It's just, all that low-growing stuff just burns explosively to a light gray powder. And when the firestorm that's produced by that is blown by the wind into a building, it also burns to a light gray powder because of the extraordinary temperatures that you've got. So I think that explains a lot of the properties of these fires that has not been explained before, that is not easily explicable in terms of the conventional wisdom that you have, that everything can be explained by climate change. I'm not saying there isn't climate change. I'm not saying climate change isn't important. What I am saying is it does not explain the properties of these fires. Okay, now there's one other thing that goes on. Okay, so one of the classes of explosives I mentioned to you, the hydroperoxides. Hydroperoxides are have very low temperature stability. So modest changes in temperature, modest increases in temperature can cause them to burn. The burning of hydroperoxides is the central cause of spontaneous combustion. So I believe that a lot of these fires, not all of them, but a lot of these fires are started by spontaneous combustion. And the spontaneous combustion that's involved is in plant materials that are in depressions in the ground where, both the wind is much lower and the accumulation of the volatiles is much higher. And that EMFs that are coming in from above them can cause these plants in these depressions to undergo the chemistry of spontaneous combustion. Now they'll initially start out just as a little smoldering thing, and you may never even see this thing. But what happens is when you shift from extremely low winds to extremely high gusty winds, which a lot of these fires involve, that stuff's going to blow out from these depressions, and it's going to go charging along the ground, burning these explosive materials. And that, I believe, is that a lot of these fires are caused by spontaneous combustion. They're caused to a great extent in conjunction with high voltage power lines, which are high up. And I think it's the dirty electricity and the high voltage power lines that's coming in and having effects. There are other things that may have effects as well, including things like Starlink, which I think you referred to before. Anyway, okay, that's a long answer to a short question.
Yeah, well, I mean, and on top of that is certainly the pesticides, glyphosate, all these kind of true spraying. And I'm the geoengineering person here, so I'm not saying anything about spraying at all other than that. So there is true spraying, but there other, the lines in the sky are not the spraying lines in the sky. Anyway, yeah, so it's all connected, obviously, right? So we do have the radiation, we do have the frequencies, we do have the space weather modification. You just mentioned Starlink. Starlink is way up high in the ionosphere, even higher up there. And that's considered space weather modification, or it's part of space weather modification. And that is creating another problem there, because what's up there is coming down eventually, right? So but it has to permeate quite, a few layers and different type of layers around the globe, around the earth, because we do have, as we all know, the troposphere, the stratosphere, the mesosphere, blah blah blah, all these different layers. And space weather modification is really, really way up high, but it's all connected, and it's all causing problems, and it's all causing pollution. And the pollution is a big, huge issue, what we're facing these days. Anyway, okay, we've got another hand up here. Go right ahead. Brian, Jenna?
Yes, I'm here.
There you go.
So many times we've had Dr. Pall on, and I would hate to have this broadcast go without mentioning if these animals are being bombarded and they don't have a car to crawl into or a house, in order for a cougar, a bear, a wolf to hunt, they need all of their faculties. And Dr. Pall has mentioned that these critters are bombarded with, you just mentioned Space Link or something, 24/7. They have nowhere to hide from this. I'd hate to have this broadcast go without mentioning that.
Yeah. Let me just say something about one of the papers that I've been publishing on and talking about in my publications, and also in my talks that I give, because I think it's a particularly important one. There was a paper, and I didn't discover this until relatively recently. There was a paper that was published by a group in Egypt. The senior author's name is El Swefi, where they took rats and they exposed them to very low intensity cell phone tower radiation, also known as mobile phone base station radiation, which is what most of the rest of the world calls it. And for 2 hours a day. And these rats developed severe neurodegeneration in 4 weeks from 2 hours a day radiation of the sort that we're exposed to all the time. And this was a 3G stuff, so it may be much worse for 4G and 5G. So, massive neurodegeneration. And they showed that you could prevent most of these effects by using amlodipine, which is one of the classic VGCC blockers. And so they actually measured 11 different changes that were going on in the brains of these rats, and they showed that there was much less change if you used amlodipine to block the effect. So this was a study that really put almost everything together. This was published in 2008, and he should have been proposing what I proposed, but he didn't actually. So it was just an incredible, incredibly good paper. And now we're not as sensitive as the rats are, fortunately, but we're still sensitive to all of these things. And so, we have to be very concerned about us and the fact that you can get massive neurodegeneration in rats. And there's also, by the way, experimental studies in animal models of Alzheimer's for effects as well, and causing Alzheimer's. I didn't mention that before, but it's true. So anyway, there is a lot of good science that's going on. Not very much of it's coming out of the U.S. And but we have to be grateful for what is happening wherever it comes from.
Yeah, I agree. Anyway, is there anything else you would like me to mention? Anybody, or raise your hand? Is there any other question to Dr. Pall? I believe that was just another incredible presentation. Unfortunately, we couldn't look at and you couldn't see your slides, but I was on the phone with Dr. Martin Pall for a while, actually, and I couldn't stop listening to him. It was absolutely incredible. All right, yeah, go right ahead. Raised hand, Brian.
Well, Bettina, you are very much pointing out that commercial aircraft are producing a lot of this milkshake type atmosphere. Perhaps it's time for us to curtail our use of this incredible tool that has quadrupled its usage. There are people, Jim Lee mentioned flying from Vancouver, BC to Seattle because it's cheaper to fly than to rent a house in Vancouver. This kind of applies to what Dr. Pall is saying. I know of Courtney Turner. She insists, I love technology. It's not technocracy. Her beloved Dr. Patrick Wood, he had a round table with a bunch of people, and they're very much advocating, can we take this technology back? The Big Brother or whoever's runs all of this, I mean, all of this was created by the military. Can we take our control of this technology? And I'm in the ballpark along with Lawrence Cumby in the chat room. I think we need to drop kick this. Dr. Pall talks about you don't need a cordless phone anyway. And ditto, Dr. Pall doesn't have a cell phone. I think it's time to make a concerted effort towards drop kicking this technology that is clearly got multiple problems. I see Hillary's got her hand up. I'm going to let Dr. Pall respond to my statements, and hopefully Hillary has some words for us. Over and out.
Thank you. Dr. Pall, would you like to answer to Brian's comment?
Well, I think there are a lot of ways we can make these things much safer than they are, including cell phones. And I would really like to work on producing the first safe cell phone, but I don't know if I found anybody who wants to do this at this point. But I think it is possible to make cell phones probably hundreds of times safer than they are now, maybe thousands of times safer than they are now. The problem basically is that you need an organization that really wants to do it, and they can make money off of it. I'm convinced, but it has to be proven, of course, and that's, it's not something that's going to be easy to do, but I think it's possible to do it. Most of the other things you can do, you can do much more safely. There's no problem. Just do them wired. And but I think, let me say, I'm this talk that I'm giving in Madrid is going to be focused on electromagnetic hypersensitivity. And what I'm going to argue is not only that EHS is real and we know how it works, and and so forth and so on, but I believe that it is, again, centrally caused by excessive intracellular calcium, and that as a consequence of that, it is almost certainly involved in every single disease that involves excessive intracellular calcium. That is, it's not just some obscure, peculiar thing, but it's something that may be very important for causation of dozens and dozens of different diseases that involve excessive intracellular calcium. Now, so, and if that's true, what do you have? You go to a hospital and you get irradiated with all kinds of Wi-Fi. You get irradiated with all kinds of electronic devices that have switch mode power supplies and are generating a lot of EMFs as a consequence of that. You get, you have cell phone towers on a lot of hospital buildings. I mean, you've got all these things that are crazy, and then you have all these devices which transmit information using wireless communication. And you're doing this with all these sick people there, and and it's probably impacting most of their illnesses. Oh, we're doing such stupid things. It's almost beyond belief.
That's right. Hillary, you've got your hand up. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's really great to have you here with us, Dr. Pall. I know Canadians for Safe Tech, I believe they've hosted you as well. I was on a meeting with them, and I know they've done a lot of incredible work in this area, and it's just, for whatever reason, it's just not enough. Like Frank Clegg used to be the CEO of Microsoft Canada, formed Canadians for Safe Tech quite some time ago, organized a committee, HESA review. HESA said, yes, Health Canada, you should be looking at these safety standards. That was in 2015. And still they're stalling and not doing anything. And I've been involved in a group here on Vancouver Island, and we've been trying to resist towers. We've been successful on a couple of them, unsuccessful on others. And I just keep getting emails about how many more are planned, and different communities who, 10 years plus ago were successful in resisting these tower proposals, and partly because of the question of liability, now they're trying to use those same arguments and they're unsuccessful, and telecom just somehow has got their way in there. And it's almost like the councils have already got their minds made up before the meeting even happens. And it's incredibly frustrating, and not too sure what more we can do, because we've been trying our best to educate people. I know a lot of people are super duper addicted. I know you mentioned legal way and prove it. That's going to be really hard to do, I think, especially with what happened in 2020 and the experimental stuff that went out and all of that stuff. And there's so many causes to things like cancer. And there's a case in the States where there's a brain tumor case that's pretty cut and dry, in my opinion, and it's still going on. It's 20 years later. They still haven't settled. So I'm just wondering if you have any ideas, and not to mention, the environmental hypersensitivity and all the animals and the pollinators and all the evidence. I don't know how it's not enough for councils. We've given it all. We've cited your work. We've cited so many professionals, and I'm at a loss for words when I hear councillors that I don't know if they don't care what. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on what it's going to take to reach this critical mass to get people to wake up about this, and I think that's the only way we're going to drop kick tech. Is it's the demand for these things, right? Like, I go to these public meetings and I hear the telecom consultant who does all the towers in my area. They hire these third parties. They work for both sides. Tell us they work for Rogers next time. They have their formulas and they are training people basically what to say, and I hear them say things like, oh, you deserve a service, oh, you don't have any, we need a new tower. And there's just way too many towers. They're trying to put them on farmlands, right beside sensitive eco habitats. And we've done our best to educate, but I don't know what else it's going to take. Like, it seems like all this evidence, it to me is convincing, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to make changes and I'm going to tell people. But then other people, I don't know if it's just the addiction. It just glazes over. Maybe it's too complicated. I don't know, but it's like all of this evidence, it should be enough, but it's not. And I don't know why. And I don't know what else to do. Like, how do we force the government's hand to make some changes and to take us serious? Instead, they're trying to pass bills that could cause, the industry head to cut people off the internet and not even tell them why. So, I don't know. That's a bit of a long-winded summary, just to, I guess, get to the point of what is it going to take to reach that critical mass to make a difference in this issue. It's been going on for years, and hearing your work and hearing people, 10, 20, 30 years ago, this stuff was being brought up. Smoking, 20 years, they had the evidence of proof of harm, and it took 20 years. Sorry, they had evidence way longer than that, but industry just polluted the science and created all this doubt. And then it took 20 more years for the government to make changes. Well, this telecom, wireless stuff is the new smoking, but it's even worse because we've got media blackouts. They will not cover it. We've got our local papers telling people that councils can't say no. And that's a lie. That is a straight up lie in Canada right now. I mean, in the US, they're trying to take away council's rights and public's rights. They're trying to just say, go ahead, telecom, you just go ahead and put those antennas and towers anywhere. And right now, as it is, we can only say something for the towers. We can't say anything for the small cell antennas, which also are super powerful. What is it going to take to reach that critical mass? We need to do it fast. Like, it's just, they're coming so fast and furious, and I'm perplexed. I don't know what else to do. We've tried to resist. We show up with buttons saying no. We put up posters. People rip them down. We've just done all this stuff that we can think of, and it's just not enough.
Dr. Pall.
I don't know how you have, sorry. I mean, everything you say is absolutely right. What could I say? It's, yeah. I think I really think what the well, they're I'm trying to think of it. So what, I mean, basically the kind of question I think you're asking is I think the thing that really needs to be done most seriously is to work on Health Canada in the following way. Okay, there are 14 different types of highly repeated studies which have shown that the safety guidelines, whether you're talking about the Canadian, Canada's Safety Code 6 or any of the others, are bogus. And the core of the scientific method is based on the following principle: that when you have a theory, you have a scientific theory, and it makes clear predictions, and all scientific theories have to make clear predictions or they're not considered scientific. And when those predictions are tested repeatedly and shown to be false, what do you have to do? You have to throw the theory out. So the focus that I think has to be done with regard to the safety guidelines is to show in court that these things are bullshit. We've known they're bullshit for decades, and there is extensive types of evidence that show as the core of the scientific method that they're bullshit. And so for that reason, Safety Code 6 has to be thrown out, and everything that's allowed based on Safety Code 6 has to be thrown out. And it's the same thing is true with the USFCC and the EU and the UK and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, actually Canada's Safety Code 6 is actually slightly better than the other ones, but it's still complete nonsense. Now, so I think so you have to tie this to the core of the scientific method, which shows that this stuff is nonsense. And so that I think really needs to be the focus of this. Now, nobody's actually done that in court. Nobody's tried to do it in court. And I don't know why they haven't tried to do it in court. But it seems to me that's the key thing that needs to be done. And so, all these things are approved based on a theory, which is complete nonsense, that these are safety guidelines, that they actually protect us. It's complete nonsense. And that could be shown. There is no question about it. There are multiple studies that show that that's true. And there are 14 different studies. And each of those 14 studies, interestingly, also show that the very structure of the safety guidelines is bogus. So it's not just the empirical evidence which falsifies the safety guidelines, it's also that the whole structure of it is bogus. It simply makes no sense. And so, how anyone can make these arguments, I don't know. There are other arguments that can be made, but I think that's the strongest one. And I don't really understand why nobody's tried to do this, but it seems to me it has to be done. I can't hear you.
Thank you. Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. Karen, go right ahead.
Hi. Well, I'm so grateful, Dr. Pall, because I brought you and one of your colleagues, a group of us did, to Victoria. I think it was 1950 or 15 or 16 or 2015, 2016, because we were trying to get our council members to not allow 5G towers in the neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And there were 300 people showed up to your talk. And they were really raring to go. But I agree, Hillary. It seems overwhelming, and I do think we have to go to the science, as you're saying. I don't know if you've watched the people in Britain that went and they put on jackets and boots and hats to look like they were official, and they went out and they sawed down all the metal poles that had their surveillance cameras on the top, as well as the 5G. And this in dozens and dozens of little communities. They did it all one day. I don't see Canadians. We're too nice, we don't want to be rude, and it's kind of pathetic, really. excuse me. The other thing I wanted to say was in regard to the stratospheric aerosol injections, which is what they're now calling chemtrails. That's what the governments are calling them, stratospheric aerosol injections. The European Union did a freedom of information to the government and got back the list of, I think it was about 11 toxins that are in those aerosol injections that are poisoning us and can cause horrific diseases like Morgellons, which basically just destroys your whole body. So, we've tried to talk to council members and other people here. They just don't seem to get any of this stuff, whether it's the Wi-Fi or the 5G or the whatever, but we have to just hang in here. And we did find out one of our people in Victoria was in the military, and she phoned the base that's across the water near Seattle, the Air Force Base, and she said, "We want to know why your jets are flying every day and spraying Lower Vancouver Island almost every single day. We watch you build trail after trail." And the guy that was on the phone said, "Well, I'm not a military person, but I can tell you that the Canadian government is paying our jets to do that." So that's interesting. Anyway, all I have to say, but again, thanks for hanging in, Dr. Pall. You're a courageous soul. Yeah, thanks.
No, you're welcome. I think you can see from my talk, I've learned a lot of things just in the last 2 or 3 years, and so I can talk about things that I didn't know about when I talked with you in Vancouver Island. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Karen. I just have to quickly interject about the stratospheric aerosol injection, and I would like to encourage you to join me to learn a lot about geoengineering, stratospheric aerosol injection, weather modification, because that's what we are doing here at Geoengineering Free Canada.
Yes, I've actually come to some of your, I've been studying it for years too. Yeah,
no worries. There's lots to learn and to know about. So, and we had to kind of, think about this in a different way now too, because there's lots more we have learned over the last years. And anyway, but that's a different topic, so I'm not going into geoengineering right now. Anyway, is there anything else? Yes, I see a hand up here, but it's getting late here. It's 8 o'clock already, but go right ahead, Brian and Jenna.
Well, I'm going to say that Dr. Pall has some concerns. I don't remember the term that he uses, but cognitive. Basically, his concern is that our brains will no longer function in order to figure out this. So, yeah, I like I said, I've had him on many broadcasts, and he would reply to commenters who are saying, well, what about contrails, chemtrails? And he would just say, this is not my field. I have not looked into it. And I just want to give a great big friggin' high five to Dr. Pall. He prefers to look into things before he comments on them. If you can imagine being a professor at Washington State University, you got a bunch of 20-year-old snot-nosed kids asking him questions. He can field these people that are interested but most likely uneducated. So yeah, that's I want to hear that this electromagnetics are definitely inhibiting our ability to figure out, are we going to fly across the planet in airplanes and produce atmospheric milkshakes? Dr. Pall is here, and just a big friggin' high five to you, Bettina. Over and out.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, I put a lot of time into geoengineering and understand what's going on in our skies and in our environment. Anyway, Dr. Pall, this was absolutely incredible. Again, like I say, I've been listening to you for hours already before we agreed to, or you agreed to join us on our Zoom calls, one of our Zoom calls. So I would like to thank you very much. Is there anything else you would like to ask Dr. Pall? Is there anything else you would like to ask me? And all I can tell you is that I will put a few links into the show notes. So when I upload this video, not just on YouTube, we have a backup on Rumble as well. So there will be some links to certain websites, to certain information. We talked about shungite. We talked about other ways of protecting us. And I saw a whole bunch of links. Thank you, Hillary, for putting those in the chat. And I will use them and put them in the show notes as well, so that you have a go-to, and you can certainly then revisit our talk tonight and Dr. Pall's incredible knowledge about EMF and this kind of pollution. Again, is there anything else? If not, then I would like to say thank you to everyone. Dr. Pall, do you have a final statement for us?
No, I think I'll pass on that. Thanks, Bettina.
Okay. All right, then we'll wrap it up for tonight. It's like I say, I'm totally stunned. And anyway, so I would like to again thank you very much for everyone for coming on. And I would like to again encourage you not just to look up Dr. Pall's work. Oh, maybe that's my final question to you. Can we have access to some of your slides, to your information? There's obviously some statistics or anything else that I can share, or a link to it or something. Is there anything available for us?
Well, I don't have my slides, but I might be able to send you some things, but I think I want to work on them some more before I do that. So
okay, yeah, we can figure something out. Thank you. Okay, no worries. All right. Okay, well then again, thanks again, and have a good night. And I'm not saying stay safe, hey? No, I'm not going to. Anyway, so you guys have a good night, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you again, Dr. Pall.
right.
Thank you, Bettina.